Yes, it might be a little more bureaucratic, but the results end up being better that way. We did have a process that we kicked off 6 months ago. An advisory committee was appointed. I'm going to have one of the members of the advisory committee, Kelana, who's going to offer a brief report on that process and share with me the recommendation of the advisory committee for the candidate. Before Kelana does kick off, just so that folks know, although I'm having this meeting in public, understand that the appointment of the chief is the purview of the mayor under our form of government here. I'm choosing to have this meeting in public so that just as no different than I've done all promotions that have taken place since I've been here in public with the help of the advisory committee, and thank you. But it's not a public meeting, so I won't be taking questions, comments from folks during this. We're gonna have one-on-one interview, and then I might make a decision immediately after, depending on how Mr. Keenan answers these questions. I might want to take a day to think about it, but we'll see in the conclusion of this interview. But before we start, Captain Keenan, Kelana, if you can just give a report on behalf of the advisory committee and a recommendation.
Thank you. My name is Kelana, and I have been an active member of the Police Relations Advisory Committee, having been appointed by Acting Mayor Murphy along with Colleen and Jennifer since its onset. The committee has been meeting every single month together with Mayor and Police Chief to discuss various policing matters and how we can improve services for the community. Following the announcement of the retirement of Chief David Pratt, the mayor's office launched a search for a successor. Mayor Garcia appointed a search committee which included the Police Relations Advisory Team, the Personnel Director, and the Chair of the Public Safety Committee of the City Council. The search team worked with the city's procurement director in search of a consultant that could help us facilitate the search process. After reviewing 2 different proposals, the search team selected Public Safety Consultants, LLC, to help us with the search. Together, we helped finalize the job description, the position was advertised, and applications were invited. Our process included a public listening session and public surveys in which we learned that there was a need to increase transparency, more community engagement and interactions, and a chief who would focus on safety and crime in the city. In addition, the committee held separate listening sessions with all 3 of the Holyoke Police Department union representatives. Resumes were collected and screened by the committee. Candidates were selected to receive essay questions. Those essay questions were collected and reviewed. Those who made it past that round were invited for oral interviews by members of the advisory committee. Of the 9 applicants, 2 were selected to proceed forward to do an assessment exercise, of which only 1 candidate participated as the other withdrew. With 1 candidate remaining, we reconvened with the mayor, and we recommended to the mayor to extend the application process for 2 weeks in hopes that we can recommend several candidates to the mayor and not just 1. In that period, 4 applicants applied. 2 were moved forward to both essay questions and oral interview process. We vetted both candidates and decided neither met the necessary experience and were not recommended to the assessment center or the final interview with the mayor. Upon conclusion of this process, we are recommending Captain Brian Keenan for a final interview. Captain Keenan is a 27-year veteran officer of the Springfield Police Department with 14 years of command experience. The committee felt Captain Keenan's years of command experience, education, and training, along with his strong work ethic, history, and of successful community policing efforts, and his vision to create an internal organizational culture where officers feel honored to serve the public and meet their career goals, would be an acceptable candidate to bring forth to the mayor for consideration of Chief of Police of Holyoke Police Department.
Thank you so much for that report, Kelana. Captain Keenan, you have a water, you're comfortable? Make sure make sure it's green. and then you speak directly into the mic.
Sure.
I do want to, again, congratulate you for getting this far into the process. And again, thank you so much for your patience. So I'm going to ask you some questions that really don't have no right or wrong answers, but instead, hopefully facilitate some sort of dialogue that will allow me and the rest of the public understand a little bit about you, how much you know about our city and about the department, and what ideas and best practices you can bring to the Holyoke Police Department, both inward and outward. And by that, I mean inward, strengthening internal controls, management, and both outward, policing services out in the public. I do have to admit, though, that although when I was coming up with these questions, I couldn't help just to feel a little bit frustrated, specifically because I started coming up with what would be traditional questions, and I started to put myself in the shoes of the audience, people observing this interview today. I got frustrated with the questions I was coming up with. So I understand, because people observing this interview, the people here in the city of Holyoke are madly in love with this city in a very stubborn way possible. And as much as we love this city, I can tell you that we're not overly thrilled about the quality of life challenges we are experiencing. And we wonder sometimes if we're really doing what we can to bring quality services to the public. So I came up with some questions that I believe are often heavy on people's minds. So we can cut to the chase. But before we do, we will start with one traditional softball question. And that question is, briefly, in a short summary, tell us about yourself. What do you know about the city, and why do you want this job here in the city of Holyoke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I start, it's an honor to sit in front of you and interview for this position. I want to thank the members of the board for their volunteer time. I know you don't get compensated for this, and it takes quite a bit of time from your families. And your dedication to Holyoke is it's noted, and I appreciate it. Members of the City Council, I thank you for coming as well. I also want to thank the members of the Holyoke Police Department, my colleagues in law enforcement, my family members who are here today to watch this. A little bit about myself. I'm the oldest of 3 kids, raised in an immigrant family. My mother immigrated as an orphan at the age of 11 to the United States of America. My dad's from the Dorchester district of Boston. We grew up just south of Boston. My parents were in that environment, like much Holyokers. They preached the importance of hard work, family, faith. My brother's also a police officer. My sister became a public school teacher. In the 70s and the 80s in the Boston area, church, family, and neighborhood was a big thing. I came out to this part of the state to go to college, to Westfield State College, and to study criminal justice. And I had a wonderful experience here. When I got to Westfield State was my first experience when I came to Holyoke. I had the great experience of attending a St. Patrick's Day parade, and I thought I was in South Boston. I found from meeting Holyoke people that Holyoke people were identical to Boston people. Very, very identical. If you disparage the neighborhood, you might find yourself rolling around with them. They love their city. I found that to be very, very much the same. As part of that, I made friends that were in Holyoke at school. Upon graduation from Westfield State, I was fortunate enough to get a job with Sheriff Ash, hired me at the Hampden County Sheriff's Department. And I worked there for 3 years as a corrections officer. Was one of the best experiences of my life. I met a whole different type of people. I had my first law enforcement experience in Holyoke, sometimes taking prisoners to Holyoke District Court. My first mentor in the criminal justice system was a Holyoker named Thomas Brosnan, legendary captain at the Sheriff's Department, one of the nicest people I ever met in my life, and he treated me like I was his son. He was very, very good to me. From there, I worked in a school for a year, and then I found my way to the Springfield Police Department. The Springfield Police Department, I've been in it for 27 years. I started as a patrol officer. I worked in the patrol. I worked in the Narcotics Bureau. I worked in the patrol again. After 13 years, I was promoted to the rank of sergeant. I was a patrol sergeant. I worked in the police academy. I did a police academy class where I was fortunate enough to train Officer Bevan and Captain Monfett, and a lot of Holyoke other officers that we met with. And that's where I really got to know Holyoke police officers. It was during that experience. That police academy was ran by the Springfield Police Department, and the staff was augmented with the Holyoke Police Department at the time. It was Sergeant Lenahan and a lot of other folks that have moved on and retired. And I got to know those guys well. Went back to the patrol, spent 3 years as a police lieutenant, which was a phenomenal job. And after 3 years as a lieutenant, I got promoted to captain. I was a uniform captain for a year, which was a phenomenal experience. When you're the uniform captain in the Springfield Police Department on the midnight shift, you're responsible for the public, administrative, and tactical safety of 160,000 residents, and there's no one to call. That's where you learn how to make the decision very, very quickly. After that, I was moved into a detective captain position in the the former Narcotics Bureau, which transitioned into the Firearms Investigation Bureau, and here I am. Throughout that career, I've been a member of the Patrolmen's Executive Board Union. I've been the president of the Supervisors Association for 8 years. I've been able to maintain excellent contacts with legislators, city councilors, administration, and people all over the state. I've had a very, very, very good career at the Springfield Police Department and throughout my life. And I was able to squeeze a master's degree in there, too. Thank you.
So, thank you. I do have people in my community as well as within the department that strongly believe that the next chief should be an internal candidate. I also have people in this city that believe the department is not trustworthy, and the good old boys network is a little too strong, and therefore the next chief needs to be an external candidate. These are just how people feel with no real merit behind it, but it's important because it will directly affect how you will hit the ground running. Clearly, you're the external candidate, so if chosen, how will you be able to overcome these perceptions and regain trust both inside the department and outside of the general public?
Great question, Mr. Mira. Two parts to that. I'm fairly certain that I'm the only guy from North Weymouth, Massachusetts, who's ever been a captain in the Springfield Police Department and a correctional officer in the Hamden County Sheriff's Department. I've been an outside guy my whole career. And with the coming to Holyoke, I'm an outside candidate, but I'm a local guy. I've worked in conjunction with the Holyoke Police on training issues. We've worked on them with lobbying issues at the State House. We've worked with them in several narcotics and gun operations over the year. I've made arrests in these streets. I've been through the doors and hallways in these streets. I've been part of tactical operations on these streets. We've always been willing to lend a hand to the Holyoke Police Department, and we have a larger detective unit in Springfield than they do in Holyoke, so we are frequently able to give assets. And my supervisor is here today, Deputy Chief Stephen Kent, has always been more than generous with our resources in loaning them to Holyoke when necessary. So I do have relationships with some of the officers here. However, I'm attenuated enough that I'm objective. If I come to the Holyoke Police Department, there's no good boy network. You'll be judged on your merit. If you've been in a position for a long time and you haven't done any work, the position belongs to the Holyoke Police Department. It doesn't belong to Detective Jones or Detective Smith. Those are the things. And by being an external guy, you also bring in fresh perspectives. You do a lot of things great in Holyoke. You got some very, very talented, brave, bold police officers that go out there and do a very dangerous job with low staffing conditions. But I think new perspectives might help. I mean, in Springfield, we're fortunate where we've been very progressive in the last 5 to 7 years with policy and best practices. These are things that can be brought to Holyoke. And the other thing is when you bring an external candidate into an organization, the buy-in is significantly easier because there's no preconceived notion, there's no internal resistance. And everybody gets a new day one. Whether you were affiliated with this group or that group or this group, it doesn't matter to me. You're affiliated with the Holyoke Police Department. And whether you're in the uniform division, the detective division, the traffic division, whatever it is, your badge says Holyoke Police Department, and we're going to be one team working the same way should I afford this position.
Thank you, Captain. Having been in this mayoral role for about 3 years now, I've observed the department to be split. The department currently is not unified. And because of the divided culture, it affects the quality of service for the public and also puts the city at risk for liability and harms resources. I know this is not unique to Holyoke, and I'm curious to hear from you what your experience has been dealing with divided culture, why it may exist, and if you can speak to some examples of what you have done to facilitate one team that can achieve a shared objective forward.
Sure. From my studies of the Holyoke Police Department and talking to people, and from 27 years in Springfield, policing can be a testosterone-driven business where people aren't always most accepting of others, and it can be very competitive. And then there's also a culture of haves and have-nots. The detectives, the uniform guys think the detectives have too much time off. The detective guys are mad because the uniform guys aren't on call. These things happen when there's no communication. These things happen when people don't sit at the table. These things also happen, Mayor, when people are in positions for too long. If you're a uniform officer in the Holyoke Police Department and you've been working your tail off and you're bringing in guns and you're bringing in drugs and you're making great arrests and you're writing awesome reports and you don't see a career path, you're going to get frustrated. And oftentimes, if you're an older guy who's been a detective for 30 years and you've had enough, but you really don't want to ask out because when you're in those tight units, you become a brotherhood. You don't want to walk away. Sometimes you need help from the boss to move those guys on, and they're happier when they do it. And that comes down to leadership. All the problems with communication and division comes with leadership, and that's where getting an outside chief can phase that, because should I get this position, we're going to have a couple of big team meetings, and we're going to get on the same page, and those who don't want to get on the bus are going to get off it because it's too important. This is a time in policing where there aren't great numbers, where there aren't great resources. We don't have the luxury, you don't have the luxury of having 30 guys in the detective bureau anymore, so the uniform guy might have to take a picture. You also don't have the luxury of having 50 guys in the uniform division, so the detective might have to step up and take a forced holdover. Everybody has to work the same way, and if we can bridge the culture and the miscommunication between the haves and the have-nots, we can do this. This isn't unique to Holyoke. I was on the phone with a friend of mine in Boston who's a commander today, and he was telling me they have the same problem with the uniform shift. If you come in on a 4 to 12 shift in some districts, you're guaranteed to get held 4 nights in a row. So it comes down to communication and getting everyone on the same team and just doing that. And, in working with people, so part 2 of the question, Springfield Police Department, we ride 2-man cars, the majority of the patrol. And I can tell you from personal experience, and anybody who's been a police officer who's been in here, there's not a longer 8 hours on the planet than 8 hours with someone you don't share their values and their things. And I've been in those situations, and you just got to say, listen, pal, we got more in common than we don't, and we have to get along, and we have to subscribe to the mission. We don't have to come over to each other's house for Christmas, but we have to do that. And, communication, leadership, and getting everybody in the same room and realizing that we're all on the same team. And there is no haves or have-nots. And as far as I know in the Holyoke Police Department, there's no rank of detective. Everybody's a police officer. Some are assigned to the same close position. So we can make everybody the same very, very easily, sir.
The city of Holyoke, we're a very compassionate city. But from what I've observed to date, I believe our compassion has brought about a certain level of quality of life challenges that has been frustrating this community a little bit, to the point where it almost feels as if we became tolerant and have limited to no accountability. We have people speeding in neighborhoods, people shooting up in public spaces, a lot of times in broad daylight. We have needles being left in public playgrounds, issues around prostitution, gun violence, domestic violence. We even have open-air drug dealing. Can you assure the public today on how you can work toward getting us a department that achieves results the community can be proud of?
Sure. Those are big challenges. Those are big challenges, and they're multiple challenges. However, it's nothing that we haven't dealt with before. So let's do them in isolation. Let's do the social services. Methadone clinics, as they're great and they're helpful, they bring an element that's not good. They bring prostitution, they bring stealing, they bring predatory drug dealers into those areas. What you would have to do is you'd have to assign a supervisor to those geographic areas. I don't know if your supervisor is assigned by geographic area or blocks of time, but blocks of time don't work because it's someone else's problem at 4 o'clock. They need to be assigned to geographic areas where they're responsible for these things on times. And with that supervision for these problems, and then we'll start with the panhandling. I'm sorry, I didn't say panhandling, but the prostitution, right? Where prostitution. I'm a little confused, Mayor. You had like 6 issues.
I'm sorry.
I'm pretty good.
I'm not looking for answers for each one, but instead I'm trying to make note that these are the quality of life challenges that we're doing, that we're dealing with. And in a lot of ways, we feel kind of stuck, like we haven't really progress. And so understanding the resources we have, the department, and even throughout the community, how do we get the organization, the system to work so that it's letting the people know that after today, after this interview, because they're complicated issues. No one's gonna.
Sure.
I believe I speak for everybody here to understand that these aren't problems. We're talking about issues of the world that we're not going to solve in Holyoke alone. But instead, that like they know that you know, and that when you leave here, they're going to feel confident that you're going to work on it, right? Like that's the gist of the question.
Okay, sir, I'll give you 2 or 3 right off the bat, right? Prostitution. We had a major problem in Springfield with streetwalkers. And what we've done is we maximized the JAG grant from the state police. And I saw Officer Zurheide at the meeting, and they have it too. What we do is we put a coalition together where we take undercover police, Springfield police officers, state troopers, and sheriff's deputies, and we target the Johns. We target the Johns, and we use undercover female deputies, troopers, and officers, and we arrest the Johns. We take the Johns and we put their names in the paper, and we get the word out that the south end of Springfield is not a good place to come buy sex. That's what has to happen here. Now, we don't have the resources to do that daily, but it has to be done intermittently. And it works well. And with the JAG grant, I know there was a meeting the other day, it's not gonna cost you a dime. That's funded by somebody else. Let's go to the drug dealing. The drug dealing and as part of that issue, when we do move from the Johns and we do target the females, we treat them as victims, because there's not a woman in the world who wants to be a prostitute. And what we do then, when we have to arrest the victims, the Sheriff Cochie's kind enough, he gives us his addiction counselor people, and they meet with them, we offer them services. And we try not to arrest them, but sometimes that's the only way to do that. Now, with drug dealing in the parks, that's a comprehensive problem where the police department would have to meet often with the parks department, with the health department, with the group on Ray Street, and figure it out. And what you do is you spend a little time on surveillance, and you identify the users and the dealers. And then you take off a couple of users and you see what you can do with them, see if you can turn them, and if you can't, then you meet with your external partners, and that's why you have officers and task forces to bring in undercovers from other towns, and you do those buy busts. And you let them know that periodically we're gonna move from park to park, and it's gonna happen. It's not a place to do this. But part of that also is we have to get with the Holyoke District Court judge and let them know that this is serious business, because oftentimes we'll arrest people for low-level drug dealers, and the courts will say, oh, it's just possession of heroin. It's no big deal on High Street, but if you were doing it in the Amherst Green, or if you were doing it in the middle of the Long Meadow Town Green, it'd be a whole different story. So, I mean, we have to really impress that Holyoke is not a place to do crime. And with the speeding's tough, but there's grant money out there to augment your patrols. And also, the state police are wonderful, and they're super useful with their CAT team. Anytime you call them and you put Holyoke officers with troopers, you double what you have for speeding enforcement. However, and speeding enforcement's difficult because to look at it both ways, I know how a lot of the officers think. They think that, if I write this guy a ticket, he's gonna have to pick whether he pays the ticket or he buys groceries for his family. That's where officers sometimes are quagmire with these ticket things, but I understand all this. It's a fine balance between compassion and enforcement.
That's right.
We have to be able to do both, and that comes from leadership. That comes from direction. That comes, your drug dealing issues and your prostitution issues requires your vice captain, or lieutenant, whoever the commander is, to say, this Thursday we're doing prostitution. Next Thursday we're doing drugs. Task Force Agent Smith, get me 5 guys, and they will get you the 5 guys, and then you do it. But if it's not happening, there's a failure in leadership again. No one's contacting the appropriate resources. Mayor, there's a ton of resources out there that don't cost you a dime if your people are reaching out to get it.
You're right. So, and that's exactly so we're talking about making sure that compassion is working hand in hand with enforcement. And you answered, the way you answered the question, I've heard bits and pieces around the things I was looking for. So it's kind of twofold, right? We have, these challenges are not police problems. They're, quality of life challenges, social determinants of health disparities, and other things that are causing these issues. So number one, as far as police is concerned, because it is an important component to the greater objective, making a lot of people, we want to make sure that the organization, that there's specific internal initiatives and tasks, and people are being directed accordingly to tackle these challenges accordingly, and that you're communicating that information to the stakeholders. And then the number 2 component of all of this is making sure that you talked about it, facilitation of cross-organizational collaborations, whether if it's with other law enforcement organizations, local nonprofits. Holyoke's filled with people that are doing incredible work. And so, obviously we want to make sure that we're maximizing on whatever potential we can through those community collaborations, but the police department's got to be present. The police department's got to be stable and ready to be effective in those collaborations so that we're actually getting to a point where we're getting some results.
Mayor,
And the people can feel it.
Policing can't be done in separate silos in 2024. You have to the chief has to be able to pick up the phone and call the park department. The chief has to be able to pick up the phone and call the Springfield chief. You got to be able to call the Chicopee chief. You got to be able to call the DPW. You got to be able to call the sheriff. You have to have those relationships in order to be successful. Because I would guess, without knowing, the majority of the folks that come to Holyoke for services probably aren't Holyoke residents, because it becomes a hub for all the other cities and towns. And you have to have connections with those other police departments and those other agencies to appropriately police those areas.
That's right. Any more? Go to the next question? Okay.
Yes, sir.
In July of 2022, the Department of Justice of the federal government released a 28-page report detailing its investigation on the Springfield Police Narcotics Bureau, which began in 2018. The investigation was prompted by the indictment of a veteran officer for misconduct related to the arrest of 2 juveniles back in 2016. The report concluded that there was reasonable cause to believe that Narcotics Bureau officers have engaged in a pattern of practice of excessive force. Finally, a negotiated consent decree was agreed in around 2022 to ensure the unit operated in a constitutional, effective manner to protect both the public and the rights of citizens. Captain Keenan, you weren't part of this during that period of time. In fact, I believe you were later selected to lead a restructured version of this unit with a revised focus on firearms and narcotics enforcement. What have you done to first gain control of a unit that may have been unfairly and unconstitutionally violating citizens' rights? What was your role in improving the deficiencies identified in the DOJ report? Maybe if you can share some lessons learned through the process of turning around what can be described as possibly a rogue unit.
Well, you did your homework, Mr. Mayor. So let's talk about this. What's the elephant? Let's talk about the elephant in the room. So the Department of Justice launched a patterns and practice investigation into alleged excessive force in the Springfield Police Narcotics Unit. Prior to me being there, right? As a result of that, there was a federal grand jury, there was a federal thing didn't result in any convictions, and then there was also the civil suit, which determined some problems. It determined some structural problems in the Springfield Police Department. So the biggest problem was improper documentation. And if you wrote a report, and this might be egghead policing a little too much, right? There was no centralized reporting repository for use of force information. So if you sprayed somebody with OC, it went to the academy. If you hit someone with a nightstick, it went to the chief's office, or it might have went here. So we couldn't find the records. That was number one. That was the first thing that was identified on. They were able to find, everything was substantiated, but it should have been quicker and actionable. And then number two, these issues came because of a lack of proper policy, lack of proper training, and a lack of infrastructure to keep up with these things. Now, as a result of that, the city of Springfield entered into a very narrow settlement agreement. It's not really a consent decree, it's a settlement agreement, because it's much more narrow in scope. And what we had to do is we identified a way to document any type of dynamic action. Now, dynamic action, I would say, is a use of force, a car chase, a foot pursuit, any type of use of force. Because before, we weren't documenting non-compliant handcuffing, because you didn't have to. It wasn't in the mass statute. It was, we adhered to the MPTC statutes, not the federal ones, and the federal ones are much more stringent. So that's what came out of it. Also, as a result of that issue, we got body cameras in the Springfield Police Department, which have been a wonderful tool, which were resisted by the officers in the beginning, and now they don't want to go to work without them. We got body cameras. And the consent decree, or settlement agreement, I want to use the right term, is it's been a challenge because it's been like so much so quickly. However, it was things that had to happen. It's stepped up the level of the organization. And I'm not so sure a lot of these things would have happened without outside eyes, because Mayor, as you know, in government, oftentimes you have to have your wrist twisted to adhere to what you do, because things are expensive. And in government and in policing, the cars are nice, the helicopters are nice, the boats are nice, but paying an attorney to write a policy, you don't get much out of that. No offense, Councilor Bartley, but you don't get much out of that. But that was the problem. We were deficient in policy and training, in supervision. And as a result of that, our supervision has stepped up. We now have a mechanism called Blue Team, where we can count everything. We can count handcuffing. We can count any type of use of force, no matter how mild, is recorded by that. And also the body camera footage is linked to the Blue Team report. So if you have an incident, and I can come into work and the guys did a search warrant, and say they did it in Holyoke, say they were helping out Holyoke on 123 Appleton. I could look at the clip, I can see the film, I can see every single thing. It's very quickly actionable. It's been a positive. And we're in the 21st century now. We're in the 21st century with use of force reporting and training. And it took outside eyes, and you don't know what you don't know. You know, the leaders, it took some different ways to get at where we are. Is it the best way to have reform? No, it's not. But however, it was what we needed at the time to get there. And we've been compliant with it, and we've been successful with it. And speaking with the captain who runs that unit, it's a massive project. It's a settlement agreement team. It's a full-time captain, full-time lieutenant, and 2 full-time sergeants to keep this thing going. And we're ahead of the game with that. We've done a very good job. Now, to what I've done. Before the settlement agreement came in, I took command of the Narcotics Bureau. I realized that we were deficient in policy, we were deficient in equipment. Our reporting was off. When I looked at it, I said, we got to do something here. I was fortunate enough that I had a friend from Westfield State who was a superintendent of investigation in the Boston Police Department. They had the same problem that we had 15 years before. We went there with detectives, and we took all of their policy. They were kind enough that they built us for free. Their tech people built us an offline informant database. We could maintain our stuff. We took an informant policy. We took their use of force. We took how they do the cars. We took the way they record money. We took the way they record buys, and we brought that in, and it's worked. We've informant-wise, we've sustained court challenges without any problems. We don't have any problems. The beauty of policing, if your people are connected and they network with people, you can solve all of your problems just by picking up the phone. Because no matter what issue you're going to come across, someone else has. So these issues were all put in place in the Narcotics Bureau. And segueing back to the consent decree, as president of the Supervisors Association, there were a few things that the DOJ wanted that were required by collective bargaining, and I'm proud to say we got them all. Field training, performance evaluation.
So you were able to be involved in
we negotiated.
Good.
We negotiated. And at the end of the day, the city was happy with it, the Department of Justice was thrilled, and the members were happy. But it's all in the cell, Mayor. It's all in the cell, and we were able to do that, and I'm extremely proud of that.
Did you have any authority to make personnel changes within the unit at all? Within the unit?
You can recommend, but the superintendent makes the decisions.
Was there any? Was there any that you recommended that they actually took your recommendation and implemented, or?
With the personnel that is regards to that incident, I came a year and a half after that incident.
Okay.
So, but I've had people, like, we've had to move people that don't fit, but oftentimes when you have that conversation with them on the side, they don't want to be there. So it doesn't have to be so dynamic. You can help them save face if you have a relationship with them.
Okay. Thank you. Have you had a chance to read our police audit at all?
Yes, I have.
So in our audit, it concluded, so you're familiar that it concluded a number of suggestions in areas in need or sometimes in urgent need of remediation. And your experience with dealing with, well, it's not a consent decree, it's a settlement agreement at Springfield, that does intrigue me, and I feel strongly can be transferable to implementing the strategies in our audit. From what you have read, what comes to mind in this regard, and how do you think you can help us improve our own deficiencies identified in the audit?
So, I enjoyed reading the audit. I've read it several times, and if you look at the executive, there's 11 recommendations on the end. I think it's 11.
I don't know.
All of them hit it out of the park. I mean, I'd love if I get the job. I'd love the 17 to 30 officers that they recommend, but I realize we're in the real world here. But I like the idea, the training, the increased training, the identifying career paths, the annual maintenance, the maintenance of the cars, knowing you're going to have enough cars. And then the big three up the top. The big three up the top were the important ones: the strategic plan, the community outreach, the building the partnership with the trust, and the third one is escaping me now, but it's there. But everything working toward accreditation. If we work towards accreditation, you'll never have a consent decree. And we have to work towards certification as prescribed by Post. And it's my assertion, if Post was enacted 15 years ago, the Springfield Police Department wouldn't have a consent decree, because the state is mandating what we always should have had, a lot of the things we always should have had in policing. But your audit is spot on, and I believe that if should I be the police chief, that's my guide to how we're going to work through things, because the heavy lifting's done. It identifies the strengths, threats, weaknesses, and opportunities that we have there, that you have in your police department.
The accreditation process, I don't know, is Springfield accredited at all?
Oh, God, no. You got to realize, Mayor, it's daunting. It's daunting. You'd be looking at a number of full-time employees just to handle.
So that's where I was getting at. So like the accreditation process, what can you, for those, and including me, I know what I know, but you know, and you're a professional, what's involved in the accreditation process? How realistic is it to get us an accredited police department?
It really depends on what you want to spend and how much resources you want to put to it. It's something that can happen, but I mean, you're looking at a ton of money. What's realistic for the Holyoke Police Department is certification, which is 120 instead of, I think, 400 different standards you got to get to. But that's much more realistic, and that's something that's going to be required by Post that we're going to have to do anyways. But once again, and I can't imagine the pressure of being a mayor when you continually get hit with unfunded mandates by the Commonwealth. It's brutal, but these are things that we have to do, and we'll have to find a way to allocate employees to those tasks.
I think that, you know, the key thing here that we as a community are looking for, that I'm looking for as a manager, is just, you know, if that's the goal, right, working together and we're not going to achieve accreditation next month or next year, but what is it that we can do this year and year 2 and year 3 incrementally so that we're working toward becoming accredited as close as we can to it? We
would have to task a full-time employee with accreditation, and we would have to monitor him, and we'd have to require him. Because here's what happens with policing, Mayor, right? I'm going to give away the dirtiest secret in policing. You ready? No. We don't always get things done. We don't always get things. The crisis of the day oftentimes gets in the way of these jobs. So if a sergeant is tasked with accreditation, and he's also in the detective bureau, and there's a string of robberies, the accreditation sits. Or if there's a domestic, or if there's 4 guys call out on the patrol, he's got to go there. So you really need to. We're going to have to do it. We're going to have to dedicate a full-time supervisor, and that's his sole purpose, is working towards accreditation. Certification first, and then, you know, you cross that bridge, and then you move forward.
So in Holyoke here, we're a small city. We're not geographically dispersed like Springfield, but we have big city problems. I can count on one hand where the drug spots are in Holyoke. In fact, I think there are many people in this room that can tell you exactly where these spots have been active for many years. In your opinion, what is it do you think that we're doing wrong? And in your experience, can you speak to strategies the public can look forward to in your leadership to give them a peace of mind today that our police department is taking these matters seriously?
So, yes, sure, Mayor. And I could probably identify them too, because I've probably been to a lot of them. Problematic spots that are always there. You have to use third-party policing techniques. Code enforcement, city attorneys can do just as much as the Narcotics Bureau. We have to identify these landlords, and we have to let them know that you're not going to live in Newton in your $4 million house and have derelict properties in Holyoke, or you're going to be in housing court every single day. The officers have to maintain a presence in those neighborhoods. The officers have to get out of the cruisers and meet the people who live there. What I've noticed in policing is the technology's been a double-edged sword. A lot of these younger officers, they could find Whitey Bulger with Facebook. However, they don't know the guy who owns the gas station on their beat by his first name. And so we have to get the cops out of the cruisers and out of the house and making those contacts with people. Police leaders have to come to community meetings. It has to be so you're on a first name basis with as many folks as you can. But
I appreciate you saying that.
yeah, but you do, Mayor. And it's the only way it works, because communication is the only way to get things done. And you always trust the guy that you know. And with the drug spots, we've done a really good job. We never have a problem with enforcement, never. It's always with maintenance is always the issue. And if you use third-party policing, where you up your code enforcement folks, and you dedicate a city attorney to enforcing those fines and getting those people in there, and you do that, and you also put uniform cars out there, and you really hit the traffic hard, the non-narcotic violations, so you remove the customer from the area is always helpful. And then once again, appropriate sentencing in court is always a problem, but we can't control that.
The Holyoke Police Department we're on several task force. We have people in our community and even within our department that feel like these task force are not bringing any value to the city and draining resources we can be using within our city borders. What are your thoughts on this? Is that a valid feeling, or maybe?
So, Mayor, in my current role, I command officers in 5 different task forces. I don't resonate with what you're saying, because my guys work. They work because I require them to work. Perfect example, if tonight I have 5 or 6 guys working in the FIU. If they need bodies because they're short, they can call Detective Lieutenant O'Toole, they can call Captain Meyer, they can call someone in the gang task force, and they'll get bodies. If your Holyoke police officer who's assigned to the task force wants to run an operation, these task force commanders will give you all the resources in the world. They'll fund them. They'll provide you with vehicles. They'll provide you with buy money. But it comes down to your supervisors and your officers asking for resources, because they'll do it. I've been here in support of Holyoke operations before. It can happen. And oftentimes what you get is you probably get those complaints from police officers more than the public, because they think because Officer Smith has a car, and Officer Smith might be in Chicopee doing an investigation, or Officer Jones might be going to Springfield 4 times a day. Narcotics and drugs, what these task force do, is a regional business. The guy who deals in Holyoke beds down in Chicopee. He might leave his money in Springfield. He could be in Greenfield. So you need those guys. It would be my contention that you probably couldn't function without them. And not to mention the knowledge base you get. We're in a situation with a real knowledge drain in policing, especially in the investigative services. The 30-year narc guys, they're gone. They're not here anymore. They've all retired. And when you get those task forces, you might get a guy who was a trooper for 20 years, who's helping out a Holyoke guy who's been there for 3 years. And they're always willing to work. And I can tell you, sir, with the state troopers, with the federal agents, they can't wait for you to call them, because they don't have the local contacts to make the cases. They need the Holyoke task force officer. They drive the bus. But if you're not getting value out of your officers, it's a supervision problem.
So, and I can tell you, just so you're aware, I've been in this role for 3 years now working, and I know the task force brings value, but I'm just sharing with you that this is how people feel. This is what constantly gets filtered up. So I think what I'm trying to get at here is, I think people hearing it from you and what you said, but I think the challenge that we've been having is how we're filtering information to stakeholders. So when I say stakeholders, I mean internal, right? Rank and file, making sure folks are in the know of, the mayor's office, how we communicate information to the broader public, as well as members of the city council. Has been not just in this task force situation, but a lot of the things that we've talked about. I think there's been challenges with how we facilitate communication to the stakeholders appropriately.
I would agree with that, and I also want to speak to some of your detectives. Now, I've worked with several of your task force detectives. They're as good at detectives as they are in the Commonwealth. As good. I'm not going to name anybody, right? Anytime we need to know who a guy in Holyoke is, there's a guy who's who they can call, and they'll tell you where he lives, who his cousins are, just like that. Your guys are engaged. Your task force guys are engaged. However, what happens with officers, and I see it in Springfield, is, as I said earlier, it's a competitive process where folks are often jealous of what the other guy does. They'll say Task Force Agent Smith doesn't have to work on Christmas. He doesn't have to work on Christmas. And I'm coming from a guy who worked 18 Christmases. So my career, I spent 12 in plain clothes and 16 in uniform. So I've done my time, or it might even be 18. But that's what happens. And then they complain. And then they'll see that Detective Smith got 17 hours of overtime last week, but they didn't see him. They don't know that Detective Smith was driving back and forth to the Bronx on a surveillance. Everybody can't know everything. But
I get it.
Everybody can't know everything, but Mayor, I'm telling you, what I would do as chief is I would audit my task force officers. I'd see what I'm getting for work in Holyoke, and if I'm not getting work in Holyoke, I'd have to scale it back. But it's a regional thing, and the way you tell that is by what they're bringing in for seizure money, what they're bringing in for arrest, and what's going on. But the station house jealousy that's built between, and it seems like it's very prevalent here, between uniform and detectives, can be solved by sitting at the table. And it seems like there's a lack of communication and divide, and you cannot, I repeat, you cannot have a culture of have and have-nots and have a successful police agency.
So in our community, we face our share of gun violence on our streets. You've done a lot of work in your unit to tackle this issue. What are some successes you can speak to, and what ideas can you share with us to help Holyoke with curbing our own gun violence?
So I don't think I'm speaking out of school when I tell you that urban gun violence is a pandemic in the United States of America right now. We recovered over 4,400 rounds of shells in the city of Springfield last year. And 4 years ago, we repurposed the Narcotics Bureau into the Firearms Investigation Bureau. And what we did there was we took our guys and we changed our strategy where we focused on firearms rather than narcotics. And we did, a lot of our work is done by leveraging technology. And our detectives, they're very, very sharp guys with the tech stuff. And they do a lot of targeted, very focused, intelligent-led policing where they're getting at the right people. And as a result of that, like I said, we've seized in the past 4 years 515 guns, just that unit. And I'm going to say with zero substantiated use of force complaints, zero uses of force, 515 firearms from some of the worst people in the Commonwealth. I'm very proud of our guys. But with that being said, the detectives have to be trained. They have to be trained in search and seizure. They have to be trained in best technology stuff, the social media cases, that type of stuff. You do it, and you target areas. The city made a very wise investment in ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter will lead you to where the problems are if you follow the maps. Now, I'm aware that you hired a crime analyst, a great woman that worked with us. She provided us in Springfield with ShotSpotter maps. And what that would do was it would give the cops on the beat, they could look at the maps weekly and see where the shooting trends are. But with gun violence, you have to leverage technology. You have to have detectives that are dedicated to it, and you have to really look at the trends and work things back. And it goes to your task force officers, too. I know the ATF task force is extremely active in Holyoke, and they do a great job chasing guns back. And that, so to curb the gun violence, I would have my detectives trained up, and then I'd also find the cops in the uniform that are very good at it, and I'd get them trained up too, and we'd start identifying career paths for these officers to go above and beyond and do that dangerous work.
All right. In this role as chief, you'll be part of a management team of the administration, which means we're responsible for upholding policy, enforcing policies, enforcing contracts, including union contracts. Can I count on you to hold police officers and other staff in the department accountable to their respective jobs and follow through with discipline when appropriate?
Oh, 100%. So the clearest indication that there's no discipline in the police department is when you start to see the appearance of the officer on the street deteriorate. Very important things with discipline, right? It has to be consistent and it has to be equitable, or else it doesn't work. Everyone has to be held to the same standards, and that's no problem. But and it has to be done. And to tell you the truth, in my experience, the officers want rules. They want perimeters. They want to know what they're supposed to do, and they want to be led by their supervisors.
That's right.
I know in Holyoke you have a lot of younger supervisors. We have to make sure they're receiving the best training they can have, and more importantly, they have to be mentored by their lieutenants. And the captains have to mentor them. And we really have to, and to have great discipline, we really have to invest in our people. And when our people succeed, our agency will succeed. But and as far as contracts go, I've been the president of a union. I've negotiated 3 or 4 contracts, right, with success. I understand it. But I also understand that you can't lay down either. Unfortunately, it's labor relations. You got to sit down and you got to get to a consensus. And sometimes we're not going to get along. Sometimes we're going to have a mediator to figure things out. And I'm not afraid to do that because it's not personal. It's your interpretation is X, mine is Y. Sometimes other people have to figure that stuff out. But to your point to the audit, and getting back to that, the collective bargaining agreements have to be, there's some things that have to be negotiated to deal with the staffing issues. If you want to speak about that, I can speak about that too, sir. But let's take the one to want to talk about, since we're talking about contracts, the audit specifically said the time off allotments. The city of Springfield, I believe you have to have 34 guys on the dog watch, midnight shift, right? 6 people are allowed the day off. That's it, 6. The Holyoke Police Department has to have 7. 6 can be off. So I don't know how the math works, but it makes it very difficult to staff a police agency with that much time. And also, I would say those contracts are dated because in the days prior to the last 10 years, police officers never wanted the time owed. They only wanted to get paid. Now the younger generation values their time off more than they value their money, and it's created a horrible, I would imagine, a horrible staffing process. The worst thing in the planet that can happen for police officers when they think they're walking out the door, they get stuck for another 8 hours, and you're paying them for nothing because he's so sour you're not going to get any work out of him. And he doesn't want to come back the next day. And it can't happen, but that's all stuff that has to be worked out with the union. And I'm not afraid to roll my sleeves up and have those uncomfortable conversations because at the end of the day, the police department has to succeed for the city to succeed. We work for the police department.
Well, great answer. I've often, no matter what department it might be, whatever the challenges or issues, usually is a symptom of a bigger systemic problem that needs untangling. And I know we've been doing a lot trying to do those untangling. And so those issues that relate to those systemic problems that might appear, we're very sympathetic to that. We're not, when I mean accountability on issues, it's when situations happened that are not acceptable or in conflict with what's expected, and making sure that we're following through with the systems and protocols that are in place, with holding people accountable to the action. And yes, there are unions involved. There's a process, and we've had our share, but that's it can be a challenge. And I just need, when you're the top cop, when you're the manager of the department, you're the chief, you become the key facilitator. I'm not in there every day. Personnel director's not in there every day. We don't. So we're going to be leaning and depending on you to make sure that you're following through with those, and then also filtering information back to the team here at City Hall so that we can help navigate the challenges and de-escalate liability and concerns.
Sure, and I have extensive experience with that.
Yep.
And it's often, like I said earlier, it's the sell. It's the sell more than the tell. And at the end of the day, the goal is the same. The members of the union that are represented by the union officials are still members of the police department that I'm ultimately responsible for their safety. And you are too. So we're all working in this. We're all going in the same direction. Sometimes it takes different paths to get there.
One more question.
Sure.
And this is, you do know that in our city ordinances there is a residency requirement, and for this position, and you'll have, I believe it's up to 1 year from the start date to make Holyoke home. Is that going to be an issue at all?
No. I like Holyoke. It's honestly, it's not. Like, my son's in college. Like, my life is easy. It's an easy lift, and I'm here all the time anyways, but it's not, it wouldn't be an issue, Mayor.
I have a counsel that watched that like a hawk. So
What's that?
I have a counsel that watched that like a hawk.
But I mean, but to that point, Mayor, if that's the deal, that's
Right,
that's
it
the
is,
agreement,
yeah.
that's the agreement, Mayor.
Well, it's the city ordinances, so we want to make sure we're.
But if residency is part of the contract and part of the appointment, it was on day one the same as is on day 366. I get it. You know what I mean? The situation doesn't change.
That concludes my questions. I do want to take just 5 minutes, Brian, Captain, if we can have a conversation and then come out front with a decision. That's what we'll do. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everybody who's observed. If you're able to stick around for 5 minutes, please feel free to do so. If you have to go, I understand. But again, we're here making a critical and very important decision for a very important position and department for the city. And, we come together as a community to try to make sure that we're making the best decision possible. So if you can just give me 5 minutes, that'd be great. Thank you. Everybody. So I don't know about you, but I have been extremely blown away and very impressed by all of it. The process that got us here, and I could tell you, it was a really good process. I'm very proud of the advisory committee and what they've been able to do together to get us to this point. And Captain Keenan, you have survived that process, made it through here in front of me one-on-one. And what I think you did an incredible job. Clearly, you're very experienced. I hope that we've been able to prove to you the last 6 months to this day how serious we are about this position. I hope that the questions asked, and again, those were questions that I know are in people's minds. I like to keep my finger on the pulse and try to navigate our community of differences to get on a shared direction forward. And I really do think that from the outcome of this process and today, that you certainly have some sense of that. And so I want to offer you this opportunity. Obviously, it's contingent upon a successful negotiation of a contract, which the city solicitor, myself, our personnel director, will be in communication to discuss from here on out. I did speak with Captain Keegan, who said that he'd be happy to start as fast as tomorrow, which just to be clear, he's not starting tomorrow. He's not starting tomorrow, but we'll try to make this as quick and swift as possible as the final step to get there so that we can get the police department the leadership they've been looking for and finally move things forward in a much more positive direction. Brian, thank you so much. Celebrate tonight. Tomorrow we reconvene and we'll get to the finish line. Thank you.